November 22nd, 1963, 2:47 p.m. Central Standard Time, Love Field, Dallas. Air Force One lifts off carrying a dead president, his blood-soaked widow, and the man who just replaced him. Every word spoken on that plane was recorded by the White House Communications Agency. The full flight lasted 4.5 hours. When the government released the tapes in 1971, they were only 88 minutes long. The recording began with an announcer stating this tape has been edited and condensed. No explanation of how much was cut or by whom. More than half of the most important flight in American history had been erased. In 2011, a longer version of the tapes was discovered in the estate of General Chester Clifton, JFK's military aide. It was 2 hours and 22 minutes, 40 minutes longer than the government version. But even this version accounts for only half the flight. The raw, unedited recordings, approximately 4.5 hours, have never been found. The Assassination Records Review Board, created by Congress, searched for them in the 1990s and failed. Audio forensics expert Ed Primeau analyzed both tapes and concluded he believes 100% that editing was done. If you want to know what was erased from Air Force One, hit that like button. The government's official account of Air Force One's flight from Dallas to Washington is a tape labeled simply, "This recording has been edited and condensed." The tape runs just 88 minutes, but the raw radio logs clocked by the White House Communications Agency show 4.5 hours of continuous communications, enough time to cross 1,200 miles, coordinate 3 motorcades, and swear in a new president. The missing hours are not a technical error or a lost reel. The LBJ Library's own release note spells it out. The tape was deliberately edited, with no details given about what was removed, who ordered the cuts, or why. The official version opens with a clipped announcement, then jumps between radio calls as if nothing important is missing. But the gaps are unmistakable. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Background noise shifts abruptly. Whole stretches of the flight, especially those involving the casket, the swearing in, and the chain of command, are reduced to fragments or silence. The 2011 discovery of General Chester Clifton's copy added 40 minutes of material, but even this so-called full version covers barely half the flight. No one has ever produced the original unedited reels. The Assassination Records Review Board searched the National Archives, the Pentagon, and the White House for the masters. They found only copies. Audio forensics expert Ed Primeau listened to both surviving tapes. His verdict, 100% editing was done. He found unmistakable splices, places where the hum of the engines repeats, or a voice jumps from one topic to another, with no warning. The official explanation remains a black hole. The White House Communications Agency logged the tapes, then handed them off. The LBJ Library condensed them. The public was given a tape that skips more than half of the most important flight in American history. Why? Who decided what the world would hear, and what was erased forever? In 2011, a reel from General Chester Clifton's estate emerged, an Air Force One recording, running 2 hours and 22 minutes, making it the longest version ever found. Yet, even this tape covers less than half the flight. White House Communications Agency logs show 4.5 hours of radio traffic from that day, but the original unedited reels have never surfaced. The Assassination Records Review Board scoured the National Archives, the Pentagon, and the White House, turning up only copies, no trace of the master tapes, no documentation of who made the edits or why. Ed Primeau, a forensic audio expert, compared Clifton's tape to the LBJ Library's 88-minute version. He found 12 splices, sudden jumps where the ambient noise repeats or voices skip ahead, mid-sentence. These weren't caused by age or technical glitches. They were made by hand, with a razor blade and splicing block, leaving behind unmistakable audio jumps. Primeau's conclusion, 100% editing was done. The review board agreed, citing crude breaks and chopped conversations that could only come from intentional removal. Clifton's tape was created by the White House Communications Agency, handed to him as Kennedy's military aide, and kept in his files until his death. The LBJ Library's version, released in 1971, came labeled as edited and condensed. Still, the review board found no record of who ordered the cuts or what was left out. The audio itself is a patchwork. Urgent calls about the casket break into silence, then resume with unrelated chatter. Conversations about the assassin, the autopsy, and the scramble to reach General Curtis LeMay are missing or abruptly cut off. The evidence of tampering lies not just in what's gone, but in the way the fragments have been stitched together. As Primeau noted, you can hear where pieces are missing. The missing hours remain unexplained, a deliberate choice made in the aftermath of tragedy. The clock on the flight deck read 2:05 p.m. when the casket was loaded onto Air Force One. The White House Communications Agency kept a detailed log. Agents, aides, and family members filed up the stairs in silence. At 2:12 p.m., the doors closed. Captain James Swindell, Kennedy's trusted pilot, ran through the pre-flight checklist, his voice steady over the intercom. The cabin was crowded. Secret Service, senior staff, Jackie Kennedy still in her blood-stained suit, each person assigned a code name, every movement tracked by radio. The radio mesh came alive. WHCA patched in 3 frequencies, 11,176 megahertz, 15,011 megahertz, and 13,247 megahertz. Calls bounced between Air Force One, the White House Situation Room, and a backup jet shadowing the presidential plane. The code names Crown, Uru, Duplex, Watchman moved across the airwaves, each one signaling a different player in the unfolding crisis. At 2:38 p.m., Lyndon Johnson took the oath of office in the cramped rear cabin. The logbook marked the moment. The old president gone, the new one sworn in, less than 40 minutes after the plane sealed its doors. The engines thundered to life. Swindell guided the aircraft down the runway at Dallas Love Field, lifting off for Washington, with the world watching, and the radio frequencies jammed with urgent orders. Every transmission was recorded by WHCA, each patch and call sign entered into the flight log. The official record shows a flurry of activity, requests for secure lines, instructions to the motorcade, updates on the situation in Dallas and at Andrews Air Force Base. The radio chatter was relentless, a procedural heartbeat under the chaos. The pilots, agents, and senior aides spoke in clipped, coded exchanges, no wasted words, no room for error. In the cockpit, Swindell kept his eyes on the horizon, the weight of history pressing down with every mile. The tapes captured it all, at least what remains of them. Orders on Air Force One shifted by the minute as the plane climbed east, carrying Kennedy's body and the new president. At precisely 2:14 p.m., General Chester Clifton, codename Watchman, called for a guarded ambulance at Walter Reed Army Hospital. His voice, clipped and urgent, echoed through the flight log. The body is to be taken directly to Walter Reed. No detours. Security detail on arrival. In Washington, General Heaton confirmed the plan. For a moment, the chain of command pointed straight to Walter Reed, the Army's flagship hospital, under heavy military guard. But within 6 minutes, the plan was upended. Secret Service Chief Gerald Bain, Duplex, countermanded Clifton's order. "Everyone but the body goes to the South Grounds," Bain instructed. "The body alone goes to Bethesda Naval Hospital, not Walter Reed." The shift was not minor. Walter Reed meant Army control, a military autopsy. Bethesda meant the Navy, and a different set of protocols. Each hospital had its own security, its own medical staff, its own chain of custody. The stakes were enormous. Who would examine the president? Who would control the evidence? And who would write the official report? Admiral George Berkeley, Kennedy's physician, objected. "The casket requires an ambulance," he insisted. The logistics were a mess. The ambulance was ordered to Walter Reed, then redirected to Bethesda, then back again. Radio calls overlapped, voices cut in and out. In the surviving tape, a fragment remains. Secret Service agent Roy Kellerman, codenamed Digest, says, "I will have to call you again after the A8 body, before the line goes dead." The rest of the exchange is missing, clipped out mid-sentence. Meanwhile, Colonel Dorman tried repeatedly to reach General Curtis LeMay, the Air Force Chief of Staff. "Grandson, come in. Grandson, come in," Dorman repeated, growing more urgent. At one point, another voice warns, "It is going to be too late." The official tapes contain only scraps of these calls. The full conversation is gone. Journalist Theodore White later wrote that, on the flight, he heard someone announce there was no conspiracy, that Oswald had been identified and arrested. Yet none of these statements appear on any surviving tape. The Assassination Records Review Board called the edits crude breaks and chopped conversations. Ed Primeau found the splices unmistakable. You can hear where pieces are missing. The fight over the autopsy destination played out in real time, on open radio, with the fate of the president's body and the investigation hanging in the balance. What remains is a patchwork of orders, counter-orders, and silences. What is missing may be just as important as what survived. At 2:18 p.m., as AIR Force One sat on the tarmac at Love Field, the radio captured a moment that now exists only as a jagged edge in the surviving tapes. Secret Service agent Roy Kellerman, codenamed Digest, patched through to the White House detail. His voice, steady but strained, began, "I will have to call you again after the AA body." And then, mid-word, the transmission drops into dead air. No static, no handover, no follow-up, just a splice. The next voice on the tape is talking about unrelated logistics, as if nothing had happened at all. What Kellerman meant to say, or what instructions followed, have never been recovered. The White House Communications Agency's logbook notes a flurry of calls in those minutes. Agents confirming the casket was on board, the doors sealed, Jackie Kennedy in her seat. But the tape's audio waveform shows a sharp discontinuity right at Kellerman's phrase. Forensic analyst Ed Primeau, reviewing both the Clifton and LBJ library versions, identified this spot as one of 12 unmistakable edits, where the hum of the engines repeats, but the conversation does not. The missing segment is not a technical glitch. The Assassination Records Review Board called these crude breaks and chopped conversations, pointing to deliberate removal. The surrounding context makes the loss even more suspicious. This was the critical window, just after the casket was loaded, just before the plane left Dallas, as orders about the body's destination and security were being debated in real time. The only surviving clue is Kellerman's unfinished line. Why was this moment cut? What did Kellerman need to say about the president's body that listeners were never meant to hear? The silence left behind is not just an absence, it is a decision. In the official record, the story jumps forward, leaving the fate of that conversation and the body itself unresolved. Each splice on the tape adds another layer to the mystery, raising the same question again and again: who chose what the world would hear and what would be erased forever? Colonel Dorman's voice cuts through the static. "Grandson, come in. Grandson, come in." He's not calling for a family member. That's the code name for General Curtis LeMay, the Air Force Chief of Staff, a man whose presence in the chain of command raised alarms even inside the White House. The clock reads just after 1:05 p.m. Central, minutes after Kennedy's casket is loaded. Dorman repeats the call, urgency rising. Another voice warns, "It's going to be too late." On the tapes released to the public, these attempts to reach LeMay are barely audible, reduced to fragments. The longer Clifton reel captures more of Dorman's repeated hails, but the conversation itself is missing. No reply from LeMay, no record of what was said if he ever answered. The official LBJ library tape erases almost the entire sequence. Forensic expert Ed Primeau points to a blunt edit, background noise jumps, the call vanishes, and the next voice is talking about unrelated logistics. General LeMay's whereabouts that afternoon have fed speculation for decades. The flight logs show him en route to Washington, his movements tracked by military radio. The urgency to reach him, and the subsequent erasure of that traffic, stands out against the rest of the Air Force One recordings. The Assassination Records Review Board singled out this missing segment, noting its abrupt removal. Was it routine to strip out calls to the Air Force's top officer during a national crisis? Or was something said that officials believed the public should never hear? The answer, if it exists, was cut from the record. Theodore White, a respected journalist for Life magazine, boarded Air Force One that afternoon to document history in real time. In his notes, White later described overhearing a moment on the plane that would never appear in any official transcript. He wrote that, during the flight, someone announced over the secure Liberty radio feed that there was no conspiracy. Oswald had been identified and arrested. The message was clear. The assassin was a lone gunman, and the danger had passed. But when researchers combed through the surviving Air Force One tapes, both the 88-minute LBJ library version and General Clifton's longer reel, no trace of this conversation could be found. The radio logs confirm that the Liberty frequency was patched to the plane and the White House Situation Room, relaying updates as Dallas police moved in on Lee Harvey Oswald. Yet the segment White recalled, the very moment when the government's first narrative of the assassination was broadcast to those on board, is missing from every released recording. White's account is not an isolated memory. The Assassination Records Review Board flagged this gap, noting that the surviving tapes skip over the crucial minutes when Oswald's name and arrest would have been relayed to the highest levels. Ed Primeau's forensic analysis found splices and abrupt jumps at the same point, evidence of deliberate cuts. The absence of the Oswald identification, witnessed by a civilian reporter, widens the scope of what was erased. It's not just official voices that have vanished, but the very message that shaped America's first understanding of what happened in Dallas. The question lingers, why remove the moment that could have reassured the world there was no wider plot? The pattern is impossible to ignore. Audio forensics expert Ed Primeau counted 12 splices in the surviving Air Force One tapes, 12 moments where the background hum repeats, voices drop out, or conversations leap ahead with no warning. The longest available tape, from General Clifton's estate, runs 2 hours and 22 minutes. But the White House Communications Agency's own logs show 4.5 hours of continuous radio traffic. That leaves nearly 1 hour and 20 minutes missing, gone without explanation. The Assassination Records Review Board called the surviving tapes a patchwork of crude breaks and chopped conversations, evidence of deliberate cuts, not technical failure. No one has produced the original reels. No one has explained who made the edits or why. Every missing minute is a decision. Each splice removes a piece of the story about the casket, the chain of command, the assassin's identity, or the scramble for control. The official record is a shadow of what actually happened on that flight. The question remains, who decided what the world would hear and what would be erased forever? If you think the public deserves to hear the full story, hit like and subscribe. Comment below, what do you believe is still hidden on the missing tapes? Where are you watching from? And remember, we are allowed to hear only half of the most important flight in American history. The rest is silence. Half a century later, more than 2 hours of Air Force One radio remain missing, chopped, excised, or spliced beyond recovery. The Assassination Records Review Board calls it crude editing. What was so urgent, so sensitive, that even the president's final flight is redacted? Until the full 4.5 hours are public, the silence speaks loudest. Share your thoughts below. What do you think we were never meant to hear?